Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really dramatic story of societal collapse and, believe it or not, recovery. We're going back to 18th century Latvia, a region they called Vidzeme back then. And it's just this incredible example of human resilience against, well, unimaginable hardship.
All right, let's just jump right in with a single, really stark number 4%. What on earth could that mean? Yeah, 4%. In the absolute hardest hit parts of Vidzeme, that was the survival rate for peasants after the Great Northern War and a devastating plague. We're talking about a society pushed right to the very edge of extinction. I mean, it's a number that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. So, okay, to even begin to understand how they recovered, you first have to get a sense of the sheer scale of the catastrophe. There's a reason this period is known in Latvian history as the Great Devastation.
And I mean, the scale of this collapse was just staggering. Look at this. Across the entire region, the peasant population just plummeted by 60%. 60! And this happened in just a few short years. Just try to imagine, 60 out of every 100 people you know, gone. Farms were left empty, whole villages were deserted. It was a reset, really, in the most brutal way you can imagine.
But, and this is what's so incredible, from those ashes, a really remarkable recovery started. And this wasn't driven by some government plan or anything like that. Nope. It was driven by the sheer resilience of ordinary people. This is the story of what they call the people's return.
And just look at this turnaround. I mean, wow. In a little over 30 years, the population more than doubled. By 1744, it was basically back to its pre-plague levels. This isn't just, growth. This is a demographic explosion. It's a stunning, stunning testament to survival.
So you've got to be asking, how in the world did this happen so fast? Well, it really boiled down to two key things. First, you had natural growth. The survivors, they were overwhelmingly young, which led to really high birth rates. And then second, you had migration. Folks from neighboring regions who were fleeing their own tough times were drawn to all this empty land in Vidzeme, just hoping for a fresh start. And this chart really shows you the engine of that recovery. Around 1731, get this, only 8% of the population was over 60 years old. With almost everyone being either a child or of working age, you basically had the perfect conditions for a massive population boom and, of course, for rebuilding a totally shattered economy. But, and this is where the story takes a really dark turn. As the people came back, as the land started to heal, that oppressive system of serfdom, it didn't just return, no, it tightened its grip like never before. To really get what's going on here, you have to understand this concept, zimtbushana, or serfdom. And look, we're not talking about some kind of mild feudal duty here. In 18th century Vidzeme, this system was hitting its absolute most brutal peak. And this quote from a high-ranking nobleman in 1739, it leaves absolutely no room for doubt. It's just a shocking, totally blunt statement of how the ruling class thought. Peasants weren't even seen as subjects. They were property. They were slaves, and the lords believed they held the power of life and death over them. So the main tool they used to enforce all this was something called klushas, which was basically corvée labor. This wasn't a tax you paid with money or crops. Your primary rent was paid in forced, unpaid work on the lord's own land. This was the economic engine of the whole manor system. So as the population bounced back, what happened? The demand for their labor just went through the roof. Between 1724 and 1744, while these families were trying to rebuild their lives, the total number of forced labor days demanded of them shot up by over 50%. See, more people didn't mean a better life. It just meant more hands for the lords to exploit. Okay, so let's zoom in a bit. Let's go from that huge oppressive system down to the individual level, to the core unit of peasant life, the farmstead, or the sita, as they called it. A typical farmstead back then wasn't just mom, dad, and the kids. Not at all. It was a little economic unit. You had the zemnieks, or the master at the head, but it often included servants, called kulpi, who didn't have any land of their own. And they were the ones who did a lot of the heavy lifting, especially that hated klausha for the manor. And a farm's wealth? It was all about the livestock. Cows gave you food, sure, but horses were everything. They were absolutely critical. Without a horse, a peasant couldn't do the forced labor for the manor, and he couldn't even work his own fields. Owning a horse was literally the difference between survival and total ruin. In this right here, this quote, it gets to the absolute heart of the whole system. The peasant farm was only allowed to exist for one reason, to provide the landlord with workers. A peasant's own survival was just a means to the lord's end. That's it. So when you're faced with this kind of escalating exploitation, it's pretty much inevitable that people are going to fight back, right? But in a system this absolute, the response to any kind of resistance was, well, swift and unbelievably brutal.
And resistance, it took a lot of different forms. You had the quiet desperation of just running away to a city like Riga. You had the more formal defiance of submitting official complaints. Sometimes it escalated to straight-up work stoppages. And in the most extreme cases, yeah, it came to physical violence against the manor lords themselves.
Just think about this contrast for a second. On one side, you have a peasant fleeing, just trying to find a life with some basic human dignity. On the other side, the system's official legal response? Torture and disfigurement. We're talking branding their foreheads, cutting off noses or ears. The goal here wasn't just punishment. It was to create a walking, talking warning sign to terrorize everyone else into submission.
And the cruelty, it just knew no bounds. This specific documented case from Dole Manor, it shows you the true nature of the system. Punishment wasn't just about pain. It was a public show, a spectacle designed to completely break and dehumanize its victims. And in this case, it worked.
So at the end of all this, what are we left with? We're left with this really profound and frankly disturbing paradox. How is it possible that one of the most amazing demographic recoveries in European history happened at the exact same time, in the exact same place, as one of the most brutal, intensifying systems of human bondage?
At the end of the day, the story of 18th century Vidzeme isn't just about population charts. It's about this fundamental conflict, the human drive to survive, to rebuild, clashing with a social system designed for maximum exploitation. And that collision created a lasting legacy of both incredible resilience and just immense struggle.
And that leaves us with one last kind of provocative thought to chew on. How does a nation's character, its culture, its very soul, get forged by a past that's defined by such extreme resilience in the face of such extreme cruelty? What kind of scars, and maybe what kind of strengths, does a history like that leave behind?